In thousands of schools across Japan, lunch does not arrive on a tray pushed by a cafeteria worker. It arrives because a group of 10-year-olds put on white coats, hairnets, and paper masks, walked down to the kitchen, and carried it up themselves. There is no cafeteria staff serving the food. There is no dish room staff cleaning it up. The students do both. They ladle the soup. They pour the milk. They portion the rice down to the gram so that every classmate gets a fair share. Then, when the meal is finished, those same students wash the dishes, wipe down the tables, and sweep the floor. Nobody is paid for this. Nobody is forced through detention. It happens almost every single school day, in nearly every public elementary and middle school in the country. And somehow it produces less waste, less mess, and less complaining than most lunchrooms in the United States. Picture an average American school cafeteria at noon. A line of students shuffles past a steel counter. Staff members, usually adults hired specifically for food service, scoop portions onto trays. The students carry their trays to long tables, eat in maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and then dump their trash into large bins on their way out. Custodial staff, again, adults, come through afterward to mop the floors and wipe the tables. It is a system built entirely around students as customers. They receive a service. They do not participate in it. Now picture the same 15 minutes in a Japanese elementary school. There is no line of adults serving food. Instead, a rotating group of students, usually about 5 or 6 children from a class of 30, has already gone through a short hygiene routine, checking their temperature, washing their hands, and putting on lunch uniforms that look almost like small chef's outfits. They walk to a central kitchen or a serving station, load large pots and trays onto carts, and will that food back to their own classroom. Once there, they divide it themselves using scales or visual guides to make sure every student gets a roughly equal portion. The rest of the class stays seated and waits, often in near silence, until every student has food in front of them. Then, together, they say a short phrase of thanks before eating. This is not a special event. It is not a once-a-year cleanup day. It is the daily operating system of school lunch in Japan, and it has been running this way in some form for generations. The strange part is not that Japanese schools ask children to do more work. Plenty of school systems assign chores. The strange part is what this system quietly produces. Better nutrition, dramatically less food waste, cleaner facilities, and habits that seem to follow students long after they leave the classroom. Why does a country ask 10-year-olds to run a kitchen line? The roots of this system go back to the years after World War II, when food shortages were severe and malnutrition among children was a real national concern. Japan's Ministry of Education, working with international food aid programs at the time, began building a standardized school lunch program to make sure children were getting consistent, balanced meals regardless of their family's income. Over the following decades, that emergency program evolved into something much more deliberate. It became less about simply feeding children and more about teaching them, through direct experience, where food comes from and what it takes to get it onto a table. Compare that to how school lunch developed in the United States. The National School Lunch Program, established around the same era, was also built to address hunger and support struggling farmers by using surplus agricultural products. But the American approach kept students almost entirely outside the process. Food service became a specialized, outsourced job, often contracted to private companies. Efficiency was measured in trays served per minute, not in what students learned by participating. Two countries solved a similar post-war problem, food insecurity among children, and ended up with almost opposite philosophies about who should be involved in solving it. How does portioning actually work without a single adult server? This is the part that tends to surprise people most. In a typical Japanese elementary school, food is not portioned individually in a kitchen the way it might be in an American cafeteria line. Instead, large communal pots of rice, soup, and side dishes are delivered to each classroom. The student servers for that day then divide the total amount by the number of classmates, aiming to give everyone a genuinely equal serving. Teachers are present and will step in if there's a mistake, but the responsibility sits with the students. This does something subtle but important. In an American cafeteria, Unequal portions or extra helpings are handled by an authority figure, the person behind the counter. In a Japanese classroom, fairness becomes a peer-to-peer responsibility. If a serving looks too small or too large, classmates notice immediately because they help divide it or watch someone else do it. Over years of repetition, that turns fairness from something handed down by an adult into something the group manages together. It is a small daily lesson in shared responsibility that most American students never encounter in the lunchroom, because the entire distribution process happens somewhere they cannot see. What happens to the food that is not eaten, and why is there so little of it? Food waste is one of the most visible differences between the two systems. In many American school cafeterias, a significant portion of served food ends up in the trash, partly because students select items from a line without necessarily wanting them, and partly because there's little social pressure tied to finishing a plate that a stranger behind a counter handed you. In Japan, several small design choices work together to cut down on that waste. First, students who help serve are also the ones directly aware of exactly how much food exists for the class, so portions tend to be calibrated more carefully than a one-size-fits-all scoop. Second, meals are eaten as a class, together, often with a set stopping point, which creates gentle social pressure to actually finish what is on the tray rather than picking at it. Third, and this is the part American viewers often find hardest to believe, the same students who serve the meal are also the ones who will clean up afterward. When you know that leftover mess becomes your own job in 10 minutes, there's a very practical incentive to eat efficiently and waste less. None of this means Japanese children never leave food on their plate. They do. But the system as a whole is quietly engineered, through participation rather than punishment, to produce less waste than the passive serve-to-you model common in American schools. Who is actually cooking this food, and how is it different from an American vending or contract system? It's worth being clear about where the line is drawn. Students are not doing the actual cooking. Most Japanese public schools rely on trained nutritionists and kitchen staff, sometimes on-site, sometimes at a shared district kitchen that serves multiple schools, to plan and prepare the meals. These are professionals, often required to hold specific nutrition qualifications, and menus are frequently built around regional ingredients, seasonal produce, and a defined caloric and nutritional target for each age group. The American equivalent, in many districts, involves food that is partially or fully prepared off-site, sometimes by national food service contractors, then reheated and served in bulk. This is not universally true. Some American districts have farm-to-table or scratch cooking programs. But on average, the level of nutritional planning and local sourcing built into Japan's system is unusually deep for a program serving tens of millions of meals a day across the country. The key difference is not really who cooks. It's who serves, who cleans, and who is trained from a young age to see the entire meal as something the group is responsible for, rather than a transaction with a cafeteria worker. Does the cleaning ever actually get done properly? Or is this an exaggeration? It's a fair question, and the honest answer is that it varies by school and by age group, the same way any chore system involving children varies. But the structure behind it is real and consistent. After lunch, in most Japanese public schools, students clear their own trays, students on kitchen duty wash serving containers and utensils, and other students, sometimes the entire class, spend a short period afterward cleaning the classroom itself, which includes sweeping floors and wiping down desks. This is often part of a broader daily cleaning routine, called soji, that also covers hallways and sometimes bathrooms, and it exists separately from lunch as a standing part of the school day. This stands in fairly sharp contrast to American schools, where custodial staff are almost universally responsible for cleaning, and students are rarely, if ever, asked to clean shared spaces like hallways or bathrooms. The Japanese approach treats the school building itself as something students maintain, not something that is maintained for them. Teachers and education researchers in Japan often describe this as intentional. The idea is that a person who has swept a floor themselves is less likely to make a mess of it later, and more likely to notice when something needs attention. Underneath the logistics, something bigger is happening here, and it goes well beyond food. This system reflects a broader educational philosophy in Japan, one that treats schools as places to build character and communal habits, not just places to transfer academic knowledge. Serving lunch, cleaning a classroom, dividing a portion fairly among classmates, these are not treated as chores separate from learning. They are treated as the learning. In the United States, education has generally been organized around a clearer boundary. School is where children learn academic subjects, and the surrounding infrastructure, food service, cleaning, maintenance, is handled by adults so that students can focus entirely on their studies. There's a logic to that separation, and it isn't wrong. But it does mean American students often graduate having spent 13 years in buildings they never had to take care of, eating meals they never had to prepare, serve, or clean up after. The Japanese model asks something different of its children, and in doing so, teaches something that is hard to teach through a textbook. It teaches, through repetition rather than instruction, that a shared space is only as clean as the people using it choose to keep it. It teaches that food is a limited, shared resource that has to be divided fairly, not simply consumed. And it teaches, quietly and without ceremony, that being part of a group means contributing to its upkeep, not just benefiting from it. None of this means one country is failing and the other is succeeding. American schools produce well-adjusted, capable adults using an entirely different philosophy, and there are trade-offs either way. More class time potentially spent on instruction rather than chores, for one. But the school lunch system offers a rare, concrete window into a values difference between two education systems. One that is usually invisible, hidden inside abstract words like community or responsibility. In Japan, those values are not just discussed. They are practiced daily with a mop and a rice scoop, starting around age 6. There is something almost startling about watching a group of 10-year-olds calmly divide a pot of soup into 30 equal servings. Then, 20 minutes later, scrub that same pot clean without being told to. It is not a system built on strict discipline or fear of punishment. It is a system built on repetition, small daily responsibility, and the quiet assumption that children are capable of more than most school systems ever ask of them. It also raises a question that is easy to overlook in the day-to-day rush of raising and educating children. How much of what looks like just how school works is actually a choice, one that could have been made differently? American schools did not have to separate students so completely from the food they eat and the spaces they occupy. It happened as the result of decisions made decades ago, decisions that prioritized efficiency, specialization, and convenience over shared participation. Neither approach is perfect, and neither country's system stays fixed forever. But Japan's school lunch program stands as a reminder that some of the most effective lessons a child can learn are not delivered through a curriculum at all. They're delivered through a lunch tray, a wet mop, and 30 classmates who are all counting on each other to get it right. Somewhere in that ordinary, unremarkable routine, repeated across a school year, a different kind of education is quietly taking place, one measured not in test scores, but in how a room looks after everyone has left it.